The idea of art and technology is sort of an interesting idea because it seems like we think about them as separate when we talk about art and technology, like they're two separate things, art and technology. But actually, there is always technology in art, and there's always some form of design or some aspect of the arts anyway in every technological product that we have. And we sort of separate them in our world, and it's a sort of false separation. And so having art and technology is a way of bringing the ideas back together again. Because, this word techne, which is the Greek word, I think, really is about technique. And art is about, some aspect of art is about technique. It's about a way of doing. So technology is like the result of a way of doing things. We make technologies. Actually, other animals use technologies. There was a time when we thought humans are the only animals that have technology. But actually, now they find monkeys that make little sort of little tools for taking out bees out of the timber, or little grubs, and crows have technology. They learn how to fossick for a grub or something, and then they learn how to use the road. They lift like a nut or something like that, or an egg. Like in Australia, the emu egg has got a very hard shell. It's about this big, and the crows lift it up, and then they find a hard rock and they drop it on the rock to break it. This is primitive technology. This is an understanding of using some other aspect of the world which is not themselves, leveraging the world, we would say, to your own benefit. That's technology. So we have sort of we have this thing which we call science and engineering, and there was a time when science and engineering were sort of thought of as differently, and engineering was more closely related to the arts. We say the practical arts, the arts and sciences. We have museums of arts and sciences, which are about pragmatic sort of applications, which are like the design of this and the design. So it's design, really, I suppose you'd say. But then more and more people, the word science has become like a special word which people want to associate with. So we make engineering like science. So we have engineering science, and we have mathematical science, whereas mathematics is really, in many cases, it's an art. We attach our whatever practice we have to whatever is the dominant paradigm of the time, whatever is the zeitgeist. And the zeitgeist today is science, right? And so even though we have engineering, which is sort of like different to empirical science, we still call it a science. So because of its power, the arts are also attracted to this idea of science in a way. And I think this is where design fits. But what happens is that when you're practicing the sciences, you work in a particular way. It's essentially deductive. You have a problem and you say, is it this? No, it's not this. Take that away. We pull things apart. We try and find out how it works by pulling things apart. And then once you've found out all the ways, or imagine the ways that you might put something together, then you put it together and you test it, then you pull it apart and put it together. Essentially, engineering becomes an issue of trying to build something as a whole from the individual parts. Whereas design is not like that. The idea of design is not that engineering is very goal-directed. We know what we want to achieve, and the question is, how do we do it? And we do it better and better. We can engineer it so it's got less friction, so it's it doesn't wear out as much, so etc., etc. All the principles of engineering are about trying to make the objects function as well as possible. But we know what the function is when we're engineering a car. We don't start out and say, right, let's put this and this and this together. Oh, it's a camel. We don't. We want a car. So we keep changing because we know we want a car. With design, we don't know that we want a car, but we want something that will take us from one place to another. It might not be a car, but we don't start by assuming it's a car. And so we think about it in a different way. We are freer to think about the problems because we don't know. We know what we're trying to achieve, but we don't know how we're going to achieve it, and we're open to achieving it in unusual ways. That's typically what's called thinking outside the box, I suppose you'd say. The function of art in technology or in an institution which does technology is not just about, the most important aspect of it is not that it provides decoration on the walls or music in the foyer or to make people feel good, feel pleasant. You hope you don't make people sick, but it's not about it being nice. Design, in the sense that, it being pleasant, it's not stimulating. And the real one of the positive functions of doing art and technology together in a technological institution like we are here is to try and help people, first of all, stimulate people to think about things in a different way, in a general sense. You make unusual shapes, you make things which maybe the proportions are a bit strange, rather than just go, oh, that's badly proportioned because, Leonardo says so, or our culture says so. You can make unusual shapes, you can make unusual color combinations, and the idea is to stimulate people in looking at it or listening to it to think there are other ways of doing things. So it's a more proactive activity. It's a more proactive function within the institution. It's not just about making life more. It's like, okay, we have a blank wall, that's boring. Let's put some art on it. So that's at one level, but there's another level too, which is important, which is to say that within an institution which is focused on technology, which is an engineering institution, let me put it like that, which is an applied science institution, one of the things that art making within the institution does is it stimulates people to think about solving problems in different ways. So, you go through engineering school and you go, right, this is this sort of problem, you analyse it in terms of these forces and these materials and so forth and so on. And so what we do is we make it a product or something, and we come up with the solution to a known problem with known techniques. This is engineering. What happens if you throw an artist into that process who is technologically aware? I'm not saying someone who's naive technically. Someone who's naive technically can get in the way in serious ways because they end up becoming dependent, and you don't want that. What you want is an artist who are technologically aware, they're technically competent, so that they're not a drain, but to work with people in the daily lives, and people will observe that they work differently. They solve problems in different way. They're not so committed to one stream of thinking. They say, we have a problem here, let's try this solution, let's try that solution. There's a really wacky solution, let's try that. And be prepared to fail. So each test, their ego is not attached to each test. They can just try things out. And that means that they can say, what if? It's quite hard for an engineer who has a set of processes and a product to say, what if we do this? What if we change all the nuts to bolts and all the bolts to nuts? for example, I mean, I don't know, I'm being a bit simplistic, but there is a different way of thinking. And it seems to me that if you have someone in an organisation or in a group, a working group, who thinks like that, they may even be working on their own project. What happens is that the people around them notice this way of working. They sense that there's a different process going on, and that stimulates their way of thinking, to think about their own problems in a different way. Now, it was very interesting. I was in Brussels recently for the EU Commission's meeting on Horizon 2020 funding for new industries, ways of thinking about how to include the arts and technology together in new industrial processes. It's related to a project called From STEM to STEAM, which is STEM is science, technology, engineering and mathematics. And they put an A in it, science, technology, engineering, the arts and mathematics, because they recognise that the new industries that are coming forward are not just about pure engineering. They require creative thinking. And unfortunately, our education system doesn't, it streams people far too early. So if you have a bit of a creative flair about it, then you're more likely to be streamed outside of the science and engineering area. Whereas if you do the engineering stream, you end up doing very little creative work. And so this means that you learn to think inside the box. And the EU Commission meeting that I was at was saying, no, there are plenty of people on the planet now in many different cultures. There's China, there's Korea, there's Taiwan, there's Singapore. All these people can do very good engineering. What our competitive advantage is not going to be that we do just good engineering. We can get very good engineering from China and it's a fifth of the price. What we have to do is focus on how do we do unusual engineering? How do we do it in a way that relies on our culture of innovation? Because the West is a culture of innovation. It changes fast, right? I mean, that's the characteristic of the West. It's not just about following procedure and going this and that, but having people who are prepared to think about the problem in different ways. And so one of the ways that the EU Commission is thinking about it and is encouraging industry to think about it is to say, you need to try and learn something from artists about the way they work so that it brings that type of thinking into your own decision making. So that's what I think the function of art and technology in institutions today is. It has a long history, right? The arts and technology are tied together because the arts in many ways were part of technology in the beginning. You look at Leonardo da Vinci's work. He doesn't make a distinction. He doesn't wake up one morning and is an artist and the next morning is an engineer. No, doesn't do that. He thinks outside the box and he makes extraordinary things, and also he paints and so forth and so on. So he doesn't make the distinction. And I think the distinction is sort of false and has been around for a while, but it's falling apart again. That distinction is falling apart. It's collapsing onto itself again. And so this is why it's important for institutions, engineering institutions, applied institutions, to start to engage in, look, I would call it design, really. Design thinking is, I make the distinction between art and design in the following way. Design is about solving a problem. Art is not about solving a problem necessarily, or if it is, it's a different type of problem. It's a cultural problem. So in many ways, the arts are very heavily geared towards the cultural, emotional, if you like, personal responses to situations. Whereas design is about, it's about solving a problem and doing it in an interesting and innovative way that also gives you a frisson, gives you a sense of delight, an unusual thing, but it solves a practical problem. One of the roles of art and technology in an institution is not to produce the finished product of the artwork and give that to people and say, here is the artwork from the sort of, the the creative genius. Now, be inspired by that. You couldn't possibly do that, or, you're not that sort of a person. Here it is. I think that's the wrong approach. That's like putting art on a pedestal. But the right way to do it is to encourage people to see that they can be like that a bit. That, of course, artists do it all the time. It's a technique. They're very adept at working like this. But to encourage other people to explore the processes. So for me, one of the roles of art and technology in an institution, it's important to encourage the people who are working in the institution to express themselves artistically and to acknowledge that, because there is nothing like putting a work on the wall or putting a work in a concert and having other people take it seriously with your name on it, to say, this is what I'm thinking. It's like it takes it out of you. It stops it being just an idle thought. It's like it takes it from being a fantasy into a dream. There are two things. A fantasy you can't do. There's nothing. A dream is a way you can move towards something through a dream. And so for me, it's very important to acknowledge the artistic skill, not the skill. What am I looking for? To acknowledge the artistic impetus that is in everyone, the sense of wanting to do things in an interesting way, of design, of shaping, of but the doing of it. It's not just the observing of it, but to do it themselves. So art comes from inside. The making comes from inside, and I think it's very important in an institution to encourage that within people. So for me, one of the important things in an institution when doing art and technology is to have, you don't have to do it all the time, but to have some time during the year when people are allowed to show their expression. In this institution, for example, there are very many people who do the most fantastic photographs. I mean, I just make that as an example. I'm sure there are people who make sound recordings and videos and make games, but they're not socially acknowledged as being game makers or photographers or whatever. And I think it performs a very great function within the institution to acknowledge that within people. They also feel like it's a personal contribution. They feel like their colleagues who they know every day get to experience that aspect of them. They will grow as people, as artists too, but as people in a way that you won't get if you say, well, you're here to do this and this and this, and if you want to go and do some artwork on your own, that's all right. Just don't tell us about it, because it's really got nothing to do with what you do here. I think that's completely wrong, and much better to acknowledge that, and then the institution benefits. It's got all sorts of social dimensions to it as well, but on an individual level, it's saying the institution acknowledges that you do have a creative spirit, and we want you to share that creative spirit with your colleagues. Then you start to get processes that you don't get by happening in terms of working together and so forth and so on, that you don't get in any other way. And I think that's one of the functions of art and technology in an institution which is focused on that.